Welcome to Brain Health Besties, a human-forward podcast for those of us who want to feel better but don't know where to start. I'm Bailey, a licensed professional counselor.
And I'm Nia, a qualified mental health professional.
And I'm Shelby, a human.
We are so glad you're here. And we believe that you deserve to know how your brain works and how to nurture it, even when self-care feels a little challenging.
We focus on kindness to ourselves and recognizing our own needs with as little guilt as possible, because your brain deserves a bestie.
Stars in my eyes, I can't see which way is right, but if there's one thing that I know, it's only up front.
Hey besties, the practices we talk about here are great for your brain, but this podcast isn't treatment. If you're feeling overwhelmed, please call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Help is always available.
Hello, and welcome to our Learning Together episode. These episodes allow us to find new ways to care for our brains and do them in ways that make sense for us. Today, we're talking about the whole idea that self-care isn't selfish. So maybe you're at home folding the laundry, going about your day. Whatever it is, you might take this time to grab a cup of coffee, sit down, and let's just breathe and practice together. Today is a special day. Today, we get to introduce our very first guest. And her name is Leslie Smith. She is a yoga instructor and a wonderful human. I'm going to invite her in now. So Leslie, would you please tell us, who are you? Who are you as a human?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to be with you. And I really enjoy this question and the way that you phrased it, because often we're asked, what are we doing, and not who are we? So thank you for that invitation, first of all. So I am a registered yoga teacher and a mindfulness and meditation teacher, as well as a transformational coach. And all of that really comes together in a place where I get to hold space for others, for their own evolution, and really help to teach them how to use compassion and kindness and turn that inward for our evolution. I get to do that through my company called the Mindful Living Movement. And we host local events in the Springfield, Missouri area where we bring together people in community so we can learn these things together and grow together.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Well, and I just think it's helpful for us to kind of share. We have had the wonderful opportunity to work with Leslie in a lot of different capacities, and she has been just so gracious in offering her talents, not just to care for the community through what she's already doing through the Mindful Living Movement, but also in partnership with Be Well, which has just been incredible. So we are so grateful to be able to get to share you with our podcast audience and get to know a little bit more about you as a human being, but then also why what you do on the day-to-day and for this community in particular is so meaningful and helpful. Before we get into all of that, one thing that we do repeatedly, both as a team and also on this podcast, is we always take a moment to do what we call a self-assessment, just to check in and see where everybody is. We usually put that on a 0 to 5 scale, where 0, we're completely calm and at ease, and all the way up to 5, where we're maybe in crisis mode, but really just like to get the reps in and trying to practice that and do what we say we do. So what we'll do is maybe take a deep breath in and a long exhale out, and then I'll just open it up. How are you all in this very moment?
Yeah, I think on our scale, I'm going to go a little higher than I normally am, and I'm going to go for a 2.5. I think it's sometimes the scale can be kind of because it's a lot of feelings fit into the scale. So mine is more of the excitement, more of a little bit elevated right now because we're on the podcast and we get to have our friend with us today. So yeah, so it's a 2.5 for me today.
Yeah, I would place myself probably at like a 2.75 today. I'm rating a little bit higher. Had some grief and loss this last week, and so trying to work through that and be in that and allow that to happen in the waves that it tends to happen in. And so, yeah, that is kind of where I am in this moment.
Well, thank you both for sharing and for going first, because I was contemplating this on the way over. How am I feeling? Because I've been listening to your podcast. And I am on that verge of anxiety and excitement because they can be two sides of one coin,
Yes.
right? And so I am choosing excitement because this is a very exciting time. And so that does put me in the 2 range, right? So where does that fall? Maybe a 2.6 would probably be where I would rate myself at the moment.
Yeah. And just that reminder that all of that's normal. That's what our human brains are supposed to do, and varies moment to moment, day to day. My grief may look like a 1 in the next few moments and a 4, 5 minutes from now. And that is absolutely okay and just where we are. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, y'all. Are we ready to kind of get into
The interview part.
I know. So Leslie, so graciously, like I said, has just come to share her expertise and her brilliance in the different ways that she serves this community. So what we are really talking about here is self-care, and often the idea that, especially for our audience, self-care can sometimes feel like a selfish thing to do. It can feel like if I am caring for me or focusing on me, then I'm not caretaking for everybody else. So our first question is, for you, what does self-care look like? How would you define self-care?
Yes. So that has changed drastically throughout my journey of my humanness. But now I define it as my relationship with myself. And, the word self-care can really carry a very selfish connotation. But as this journey has evolved for me, it's really become, how am I in relationship with myself? And how am I choosing to acknowledge how I'm feeling, like we just did? Am I taking time to do that? Am I taking time then not only to acknowledge it, but then how am I going to choose to nourish those needs that I have? And it's been a long journey, right? Because it can feel selfish at first, but it's really a coming home at this point. And I need a constant reminder to turn that attention inward, because our attention can be pulled in a million different directions. So it is a practice every day. Yeah. So it is a practice in relationship with myself is how I would define it.
How did you get there? Like, we know that humans grow constantly, or at least we're hoping that happens. And you said that that's changed over time. What did that change, that metamorphosis or that change process look like for you? Like, what were kind of some of those prompts?
Yeah. So I remember actually kind of the beginning of understanding that I needed self-care and that I needed to make time for it when I was about 26, and I was looking at our family calendar, and I had 2 young children. And I remember looking through the calendar and trying to be like, well, when does it end? When do the tasks end so I can take care of myself? And that was the beginning of oh no, the tasks never end. And so maybe I'm going to need to find some time to care for myself here in this moment, in this lifetime, right? And so at first it was really like a checkbox. It was, I'll get to my self-care when. I'll take care of myself when this is done. But again, that list is never ending. So really it took off for me, and a true understanding of what I needed internally for my self-care, and not externally on that checkbox of go get the massage or, take a moment to take a walk. It really came when I was searching for ways to help my son, who at the time had a severe behavioral disorder. And I was trying to find ways, this was the early 2000s, for how to help him. And so I came across the practice of mindfulness at this time. And at the moment, it was, well, I'm going to teach my child mindfulness so that he can regulate his emotions, right? And that was very well intentioned, but as you can imagine, not as easy of a feat as one might think. But as I'm going through this journey and understanding mindfulness and understanding how it works and how it applies, I'm starting to have my own journey of understanding myself and turning my attention inwards and understanding that importance and how important it is for me to show up in that capacity for myself so that I can then show up in that capacity for my children. And maybe not so much am I teaching them mindfulness through techniques, but I'm teaching them mindfulness through my own embodiment of my own awareness. And so obviously that's a long journey, but that's where it started.
Leslie, that makes me think. I'm laughing because in my own therapy, constantly my therapist, when I talk about, and this comes up for parenting, with parenting for me all the time. But this reflection of, I'll say, oh, I said this to my kiddo. And she'll be like, ooh, who else needs to hear that? And I'm like, oh, Yep.
Yes.
Okay, it's true. And so often we're like, I will do this for my people, my children, my partner, my friends. And then the true gift is it's actually for us. And there were moments when I had my littlest was little bitty, where she would be in a big feeling that I would just sit on the floor and breathe. And for me, not for her. But it would stop her and she'd be like, "What you doing, Mama?" I'm like, "Mama's taking deep breaths because Mama needs deep breaths." Like just being able to, like you said, embody that in a different way. Thank you so much for sharing that.
When we're talking about, so far has come up, the word selfish came in there a little bit, or feeling like it's selfish and kind of the parenting. But I do imagine that's what kind of sometimes can kind of be a barrier for people. So do you have any tips around that aspect? Do you have any tips, or is there a certain story you might share about how you kind of moved away from this is going to feel selfish instead to wanting to grow?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really one that I continue to circle around every day, probably, right? Because we live in a society where, as caregivers in any capacity, we are really conditioned and told to do things a certain way for everybody else, right? But I was never really taught that I need to do those things for myself, right? And so when we talk about selfishness in this arena, I mean, kind of like the story I just mentioned, where when I do take the time, even though it feels like I shouldn't, right? When I do, then I can show up in a way that is so much more important for myself and my well-being and the well-being of my family and the well-being of those around me. And, you know, one of the things that I've learned too in my journey with self-care and mindfulness is that a lot of times as caregivers, we have atrophied the capacity to receive. We give and we give, but when we need something, we almost have a block in receiving it, whether that is from an outside source or our own internal source. So there's actually an indigenous culture to the Andes. They're actually still a living wisdom tradition. And they have this beautiful word called Ayni. It's Ayni. And it means sacred reciprocity. And it's the idea that we live with all living things, human, the earth, in this beautiful circle of giving and receiving. But as caregivers, sometimes we have forgotten that. And so to me, anytime that I do feel caught in that selfishness loop, I try to remember this beautiful word, Ayni, and come back to the right relationship within all humans. There is this reciprocity, and that I deserve to be a part of that too, even when it feels really hard to do.
Yeah. And I think that in my brain, that fires too. Oftentimes as caregivers, we're looking through it from a third lens, right? I'm doing this for my kiddos. I am doing this for my people, which is completely understandable and a welcome space to be. And I think for me, a big pivot point or point of growth was when I was like, oh no, I can do this for me. It actually doesn't have to be in service of anybody else, but this is something that I can do for me because I deserve it, because that's something that I need for that reciprocity piece.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because too often we're looking to receive from someone else, but we can receive what we need from ourselves when we know we need it and are willing to give it to ourselves.
Yeah. Whew. Just letting that one sink in a little bit, because that is so easy to forget. It is so easy to say, especially when we're either natural caregivers because of our profession or because we're parents or caregivers of aging parents or whatever. And some of us are just caregivers by heart. It is really easy. And we've talked about this in different ways, but it's really easy to push those pieces to the side of like, I'm doing this for, or I will care for everybody else. And then it's kind of like that rest thing too. When that's all done, I'll care for me. And what that ends up is with us completely depleted, not only not caring for ourselves, but not caring for those we love dearly as meaningfully as we could be either.
Yeah. And you know, that kind of bridges to where we're headed in our conversation for the next segment. A lot of times we have blocks, we have old stories that maybe tell us that we're not worthy of the rest, we're not worthy of the love, or we're not worthy of whatever it is that we need in that moment. So we'll talk a little bit about that too as we work into our practice.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for mentioning the practice, because the follow-up episode to this one is going to be a practice on affirmations. I have had the joy and pleasure of being led through affirmations with you before. And I'm curious, kind of in your journey, when did you find affirmations? What has that looked like for you?
Yeah. So really it started when I had a daughter. And I was walking her through, just the journey of adolescence and finding love for herself. And that's when I really realized that the way that I talk to myself is not really that loving, right? And so when she would say things out loud and I would say to her, would you ever say those words to someone else? The words you're saying to yourself, would you ever say that to a friend or to a loved one? And that struck me straight in the heart because I realized that a lot of my self-talk was not loving and not caring. And so then that became the unfolding of rewiring, rewording, retelling the story that I've lived in my head at this point for so long, right? Into my late 20s, the probably forever journey at this point of reframing the things that I'm saying to myself and ultimately, what is she saying to herself, right?
Yeah.
But I was able to turn that mirror around because, like we talked about before, they're really looking at how we're embodying and how we're presenting ourselves in life, not so much what we're telling them.
Absolutely. I feel like I jumped ahead a little bit. Can you help us define what affirmations are?
Yeah, so they are intentional positive statements that are meant to help us rewire our minds, right? To help us release the old stories and the old patterns of ideas that have been given to us that may not be true.
Yeah. I love that rewiring part. I'm actually listening to an audiobook right now that deep dove into some research on how for the longest time we used to think that adult brains cannot create new neurons and cannot rewire. But what they're finding resoundingly true is that we are capable of rewiring and growing new brain neurons up until the moment we leave the earth. And so it's hopeful. It's hopeful to think like, just because these thought patterns are spaces that I live in right now, it doesn't have to stay that way. We can rewire our brains. And I know Nia talks a lot about rewiring too.
I think that's my best news that I can tell people.
Yes.
whenever we can, that just is. Like Bailey was saying, we used to think we got to a certain age and sorry. But that's
what you get.
True.
Yeah.
Yay.
That's not true. We get to learn and grow. And so we were talking around just the idea of those affirmations. I'm wondering, though, if we can talk about when someone might feel like they needed them. When would they benefit most? Is there something that comes up for them physically? Is there something that, I know sometimes we get stuck in those thoughts that kind of get stuck in our head, but what would you think? What would you think, Leslie? What would you share with us around that question?
Yeah, in my own experience, and I know it can be on many, many levels, but in my own experience, as a mom and a wife and a coworker, I get lots of interactions with other people, right? And so usually when I'm having an interaction with someone and I feel that irritation start to bubble up, right? I realize very quickly that is internal. At least the source at the moment is, and I maybe need to take a moment just to check in, see how I am feeling, see what my needs are, how can I reaffirm them at that moment so that way I can show up maybe in that moment or maybe after a break in a more authentic and loving and compassionate way. So irritability is probably my number one indicator. And then as I've worked through the understanding of the body and how not only our mind can sense irritability, but also our body, I will feel my body tense. I will feel my shoulders constrict. I will feel my muscles start to tighten up. So in that moment when I'm paying attention, right, I can maybe take a moment to breathe into that, get myself back into balance, reaffirm where I am and what I'm doing, give myself what I need, and then make that step forward. That's how it shows up for me most often.
Yeah. Well, and things like those check-ins, because for me too, my body will yell at me long before my brain registers what's going on. So even those check-ins, whether or not we're putting a number necessarily, we can also feel into our bodies to say, ooh, like my shoulders are creeping up near my ears, or my neck feels really tense, or my brows are furrowed, or I have a headache. Those are all really good indicators that our body is saying, yeah, we're in a spot where maybe we need to pause, we need to practice an affirmation or some kind of self-care. And thank you for giving the example of kind of what that looks like in the day-to-day. So I'm curious about next step. Once you get to that point where you're like, okay, I deserve this moment to check in. How does that play out? What does that look like utilizing that affirmation or that piece?
Yeah, great question. So, if you're in a conversation with someone, obviously you might just need a moment, right? And it's okay to say, I need just a minute. Do you mind if I step away? And just take a moment to really breathe, right? One of my favorite practices to bring myself home to my body, to understand what's going on, is to place my hand over my chest. That brings my awareness from the outside in so that I can begin then to check in and figure out, what am I going through? What do I need? And how can I give that to myself either in this moment or in the next moment so that I can show up with that loving compassion. So it's really just that check-in, right? That stopping and breathing and being that is my number one go-to.
I love that. I think sometimes we miss the whole sensation of touch in this world where we're going so fast, and some people aren't necessarily huggers or handshakers even, but to be able to just give that to yourself by placing your hand on your own chest for that reminder. Thank you for that.
The cool thing about that too is after about 10 seconds, our brains can't tell the difference between caring touch, if that is our own, and from somebody else. So if we can allow ourselves to be in that and just let the awkwardness of like, I've got my hand on my chest settle for a few minutes, our brains can't tell the difference. And so we can, Dr. Kristen Neff in her self-compassion work talks a lot about that, about how we can use nurturing touch to care for ourselves, even when there's not somebody else physically around. So I love that you talked about coming home and utilizing that and your points with it too.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's also a good reminder for me to respond from my heart as well.
Yeah.
Right. And not of the noise of my mind, but then when I have settled, my hand is still there. It's that gentle reminder that when I do speak, to speak through the screen of the compassion of my heart.
Yeah. This world could use a little more of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to get to the practice part if we're ready.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right, bestie. So if you follow up on the next episode, episode 20, we will actually walk through the practice of using affirmations to care for ourselves in those moments when we deserve it most. We look forward to seeing you in that practice. Take care, besties. If you enjoyed this episode, like and subscribe to Brain Health Besties so you can find us in the future.
And since sharing is kind, share us with your besties.
If you have mental health or wellness topics you'd like us to chat about, please reach out to bewell@livebrightly.org.
Until next time, be well, besties.
Shining brighter than the sun. I'm me.